Want to know why? Ask how. Howard, wait! We forgot to turn on the air conditioner. Howard, the humongous. All right, I've written something for you tonight. Bear with me while I try to read it to you. It's about how to defeat ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, those wonderful beheaders of journalists. And it's doing it by gathering together an alliance of enemies. Here we go. Let's see if I can actually read. ISIS may be a greater danger than it seems, and it may provide an opportunity to bind bickering nations together in whole new ways. Why? We need to put together something very new, something beyond a team of rivals. We need to pull together an alliance of enemies. ISIS is the Islamic State, the former Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. It's the self-declared caliphate in Iraq and Syria that has beheaded 2 journalists and has invaded Syrian and Iraqi towns, killed the men, decapitated the children, and taken the women as sex slaves. Early in September of 2014, the Islamic State posted leaflets claiming that Pakistan and Afghanistan are now a part of its territory. In other words, it told Al-Qaeda and the Taliban that henceforth they must bow to ISIS. What's more, the Islamic State has shown intercontinental magnetism. Boko Haram, the Nigerian group that seized more than 200 schoolgirls as sex slaves in just one attack, and that now we have a frog in my throat, and that now controls a growing swath of Nigeria's northeast, swore its support for the Islamic State in July, then declared that it too is establishing a caliphate, an African caliphate. Reports say that ISIS plans to take all of the Middle East, the top third of Africa, all of Spain, and substantial chunks of Europe in the next 5 years. 5 mere years. And that's what the recruits flocking to join ISIS are hoping for. They're hoping to become the rich men and the rulers of a territory 3,800 miles wide. That hope is not as crazy as it sounds. Once upon a time, from 624 AD to 750 AD, there was a jihadist entity even smaller and more improbable than ISIS. It came from a land so obscure, let me wrestle with the paper here, that the superpower heads of its day knew nothing about it. Heracles, the Caesar of Rome, ruled the former Roman Empire from Byzantium. He received an invitation to a new religion from the leader of a bunch of trifling tribesmen. That letter implied that if the emperor did not accept his religious invitation, he would face violence. When Heracles asked where the letter came from, his advisors told him that it was from a people too backward for an emperor to bother his head about. From the Arabs, said his advisors, people of sheep and camels. Yet within 122 years, that's 122 years, that people of sheep and camels had conquered an empire 11 times the size of the conquests of Alexander the Great, 5 times the size of the Roman Empire, and 7 times the size of the United States. The biggest empire in the history of the world. Those who rush to join ISIS ranks are hoping that that streak of luck repeats itself, but they do not regard it as luck. They regard it as the will of God, the inevitable will of Allah. If you've wondered where the beheadings the killing of a village's men, and the taking of women and children as sex slaves, slaves to be taken by rape, to be given in marriage, or to be sold, comes from. It comes directly from the examples of Muhammad's life. Muhammad was never called a prophet of peace. That is a strictly Christian phrase. He called himself Nabiyyu la Malhama, the prophet of war. Why? Muhammad commanded 65 military campaigns, personally led 27 of them, and according to the Universal Sunnah Foundation of Pakistan, conquered an average of 317 square miles of territory a day for 8 years straight. Muhammad gloried in the fact that he'd defeated the village of the Jewish Banu Qurayza tribe, had ordered the beheading of every male old enough to have pubic hair, then had sat in the market square of the town that served as his headquarters, Medina, and had personally supervised every neck sewing. As for the women and children, if we can only manage to turn this page, divvying them up gets an entire chapter in the Quran. It's chapter 8, Al-Anfal, sometimes translated as the spoils of war, sometimes translated as the booty. That incident has led generations of Muslim scholars like Iran's founding father, the Ayatollah Khomeini, to crow very proudly that, quote, and I'm quoting the Ayatollah, Islam has obliterated many tribes because they were sources of corruption and harmful to the welfare of Muslims. And it has led many of those scholars to urge that this obliteration be repeated, maybe on your tribe. What does this mean for Barack Obama and David Cameron, two men who called for NATO to unite against ISIS in an editorial they published in the Times of London on Thursday, September 4th, 2014? It's time for an alliance that goes far beyond NATO. It's time for a truly global alliance, an alliance of enemies. That alliance should include China, which is under assault from jihadist groups in its far western province of Xinjiang. China's armies lost to the Muslim forces in the Battle of Talas in 751 AD, 1,262 years ago. Yes, the Chinese, with their massive empire and their enormous armies, lost to the armies of Islam. The biggest province of any nation in the world is China's Xinjiang province. Xinjiang, which is sometimes called China's Wild West, is a staggering 1.6 million kilometers in size. That's the size of 11 Germanys. Of Xinjiang's 21 million people, roughly 58% are Muslim. That's over 12 million Muslims. That's as many Muslims in Xinjiang as there are in Jordan and Libya combined. The jihadists of China's Xinjiang province apparently have severely limited access to firearms. The laws in China are not as permissive about weapons as our laws are. And so, lacking explosives and firearms, the citizens of Xinjiang improvise. In one case, they used a car. On the 28th of October 2013, a car with Xinjiang license plates crashed in Tiananmen Square in China's very capital, Beijing, and it burst into flames. Police called it a terrorist suicide attack. In a sense, it was a pathetic excuse for terrorism. Of the 5 people who died in the incident, 3 were inside the car. The 2 outsiders were tourists one Filipino, and one Chinese visitor from the Guangdong province. But the East Turkestan Islamic movement, a Xinjiang Islamic party, claimed responsibility and seemingly confirmed that the car fire was indeed an attack. 3 alleged masterminds were executed in August of 2014. Meanwhile, on March 1st of 2014, 8 knife-wielding men and women hit the Kunming railroad station in the Yunnan province in China's southwest. They killed 29 civilians. They injured 140. Police only managed to kill 4 of the 8 attackers. 4 months later, in July of 2014, the Chinese government apparently tried to shut down Ramadan celebrations in Xinjiang. This was a poor idea. Ramadan is a deeply important holiday on the Muslim calendar. So according to Time magazine, knife and axe-wielding Uyghurs, the people of Xinjiang, went on a rampage and were subsequently gunned down by Chinese police. The eruption killed close to 100 people. But China is not the only rival we need to bring into our anti-ISIS alliance. Our coalition of enemies, our coalition against ISIS, should also include Russia, which is under attack from jihadist forces in 8 states of the Russian Federation. Those 8 largely Muslim states stretch like a belly pouch across Central Asia from Turkey in the east to China in the west. They include Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, Dagestan, and Chechnya. For decades, we have ignored a Russian wish, a desire that we recognize a simple fact. Through the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde, Islam ruled Russia, pushing it around like a slave for roughly 160 years. That humiliation still stings the Russian collective memory. And the clash with jihadists hasn't stopped. Far from it. In the last 20 years, jihadist forces have flattened Moscow apartment buildings, killing 212 people. Jihadist forces have taken 1,000 audience members at Moscow's Dubrovka Theater in an act of war that killed 130. Jihadists have taken 1,100 hostage in a school in Beslan, an incident in which 334 were killed, including 186 children. And jihadist forces have fought wars against Russia recently in Tajikistan and Chechnya. This jihadist menace is the same threat that we face. That's what the Russians want us to acknowledge. That fact became clear when Russia warned us of the danger of 2 Chechen American brothers. Their names were the Tsarnaevs. They had been consorting with jihadists in Dagestan. We didn't listen. And the Tsarnaevs pulled off the Boston Marathon bombing. We also need to unite with 2 of our ugliest enemies. One is Syria's dictator, Bashar al-Assad, a monster of a man. Why? Why unite with Bashar al-Assad? We've learned a lesson from the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Some nations have greater freedom under a dictator than they do in the murderous chaos that arrives when the dictator disappears. Some nations make greater strides in education, medicine, freedom for women, and secularism when they are in an iron grip than when they are fled to the flames of factionalism and the flames of jihadism. The second enemy we need to bring on is Iran. Iran is a menace. The threat of its nuclear weapons is far greater than most of us would like to think. But ISIS regards all 76 million Iranians as heretics. And heresy, in the eyes of ISIS, is punishable by death. As an Al-Qaeda magazine once put it, quote, "The annihilation of infidels is a divine decree," close quote. And Iranian Shiites, in the eyes of ISIS members, are worse than infidels. Then there's yet another ally we need to pull in. It's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, including Al Jazeera's owner, Qatar, have underwritten ISIS. They have funded ISIS. 3 years ago, the embryo of ISIS was one of Saudi Arabia's pawns in a proxy war. A war between Iran and Saudi Arabia that we've been taught to believe mistakenly is a Syrian civil war. The Syrian civil war is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. 200,000 people have died in that proxy war. But in the last few weeks, Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has awakened to the fact that ISIS endangers the entire Saudi royal family. ISIS threatens to cut off the king's head. You can see that I'm terrible with turning pages. Even Israel should be brought into this coalition. Why? ISIS wants to see it wiped from the planet. The ISIS crisis can be an opportunity for the greatest global coalition in history, the greatest team of rivals, an alliance of enemies. In that strange way, the ISIS crisis can be an opportunity for peace. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now, for that infamous, slimy, slithy little off button. Let's see if we can find it. I've got it!